Hey, my son and I have been getting this Subaru Outback back on the road, and like a lot of 1999 Subaru Outbacks, it has a problem with an intermittent speedo. So this video is put together to show how we fixed it, and we've used resources from a number of different places to do that. Now, there are a bunch of resources we use to get this work done. The first of these is excellent, goes through the details of the repair itself. The second shows how to take the dash cluster out, and the third one is a great resource. It's a paid for resource, but I've got all the data for my vehicle from there. Now, if you go on YouTube, you might see something like this as a fix for the Subi Speedo. This is what mine looked like before I went in and actually fixed it properly. I strongly suggest you don't go this route. This is not a good fix. These are the videos I took when me and my son were actually doing the work on the speedometer.
Okay, this is stage one disassembly. There's two metal connectors that are screwed in at the top that clip into the back of this assembly here that hold it to the glass and the black front fascia. We've just removed those, so we've got the white plastic back housing with the gauges in, and of course we're being really careful. We don't want to get any dirt on here or damage any of the gauges. Okay, on the back of the Speedo, just below the blue connector, you can see there's a screw here. Now it looks like the Speedo is ready to move out forwards, so I'm just going to detach this single screw and see if that does the job. Okay, that single screw on the back has been removed. We did that with this board facing upwards so that the gauge didn't fall out if that released it. And now it seems the whole gauge is ready to come out in one piece. We'll lay that down on the bench and we'll have a look at it. Looking at the back of the Speedo, here's the circuit board. So you can see we've got, it looks like a two-layer board. So here's the green back side, and if we look at the side of the assembly, there's some pins that go through from the circuit board and connect it to the components underneath. So we're just carefully going to lever these apart. Okay, so here we go. They'll leave it apart. This is the back of the Speedo assembly. There's the step motor, and there's the connections that go into the side of the body here. So I'm going to make sure we put some connector cleaner on those before we reassemble. Just make sure that the electrical connection is good, and also over on this other side of the board. This is potentially the problem area. It looks like somebody might have had a go at this already. So I'm going to get a test meter on here and we're going to have a damn good look through the connections. Now, I've got a feeling that 99, 98 was the year that the ROHS rules came in, so people started using silver solder rather than lead-based, and there wasn't a lot of good experience in the industry for how to make joints that lasted a long time. And I'm wondering if that's really the problem here. So I'm going to use lead-based solder, and I'm going to resolder the lot. We're just looking back in the car for a second where we've removed the Speedo cluster from. Now you see this blue connector? This is the one that goes in to the back of that circuit board. You'll see there's only one connection. It's a 5-pin connector and there's only one pin connected. This is the Speedo pin, the critical one. It goes in, I'm pretty sure from the disassembly, goes in this way. So what I'm looking for on that connector is the one pin that's connected. Here's the matching connector on the circuit board, and you can see the 5 pins in there. It's the middle one. So I'm just going to flip the board over so we can have a look. See the middle pin, and it's a bit indistinct, but just through the solder mask you can see the copper tracking that goes over to this place marked J8, where there's a blob of solder. Got a feeling that that might be part of the issue there, but I'm also going to look at the board here. I'm looking at these connections, and some of them are a little bit shiny, but they do look a bit, as we say in the trade, dry. So first step is going to reflow that, but I'm going to go and reflow all the joints on the board at the same time. I'm also going to just put a test meter on and test continuity on this connection, see it's not broken already. Tracing the connection from the center pin here, it goes to this jumper marked J8. If we flip over the circuit board, you see on the other side just find something to point with. Right, these two pieces here, that's J8. Now the signal looks like it comes from here, jumped over to here, which connects with this track marked SP, which goes onto these points here. But the other way, this track goes up around over the top of the board, around here. On the flip side, this is a diode, and then it gets into the whole mess of components around under the chip here. Now, the chances of a connection here being bad, pretty low. If it was working at all, these connections are going to be, made pretty well. And there's a risk in resoldering any of these that I make a solder bridge and I make things worse. So I'm going to have a good inspection over these joints, see if they look good, resolder any that may look dry, but I'm going to do that very carefully and without any additional solder on the iron if I can possibly avoid it, to just make sure that the connections are good. The other thing is I don't want to apply any extra heat to the chip, which could cause damage to an aging component. So the place where I suspect the problem is over by this connector. There's a lot of mechanical strain over here. If there's a bad solder joint, it's going to get cracked. It's when there's mechanical bending, and that's over this side of the circuit board. The rest of this area here, I suspect, is probably just fine. But the other places, there's these are the far side of the 4 motor drive connectors here, and there's some additional connectors here. These are pins that go through the board that connect. I'm going to make sure that I reflow these as well. Again, there's mechanical strain on those, so if there's cracks in the solder joints, these are the places where it's likely to be. Okay, I'll check in again once I've done the reflow, and you can see what the result looks like. Just a quick note around soldering. This is a temperature controlled iron with a fairly fine tip. I was using this the other day. It's still got some solder loaded up, and I've just got a wet cloth. I'm just going to clean off the tip. So there's no spare solder on there, and you can see the tip looks nice and shiny. This is what you're looking for before you start work with the iron. And I've got the temperature on this iron set to about 650 Fahrenheit, which should be good enough to give me a good reflow, but I don't want to leave the soldering iron on the board for very long while I'm doing it. Okay, here goes. So I've reflowed the circuit board as far as I feel is prudent. You can see I've put in a red jumper wire here from the middle pin over to J8. So if the circuit board has got a crack in it, or that happens to be the problem, this wire should provide a signal path. The other pin that's connected on this connector is actually pin 1 to J9. It's not connected through to the Speedo wire in behind the dash, so I'm wondering if that might be some kind of a debugging connector or something like that. Anyway, I just made sure that connection was still there, and made sure with a continuity meter that I haven't shorted out any of these other pins. Not that it seems critical, but if we're going to do a job, let's see if we can do it right. And on the flip side of the board, you can see the bright and shiny connections where I've resoldered, getting rid of a lot of the old tarnish from there. I've just used a tiny bit of new solder, put it together with the tip of the soldering iron, and reflowed them. The transistors, the capacitors, the TR1, C5, C9, C6, J6, C2, I have not touched these guys. The chances of those being the problem seems to me to be very low, and I just don't want to risk breaking the solder connections. If I had a good magnifier here, I might try it, but I'm 50, I've got progressive lenses on, and my near focus ain't what it was 10 years ago. So that's what I feel is prudent to do right now. And I've just sprayed some contact cleaner on there and on the flip side of the board for these pins. When I resoldered the far side of these pins, I put them in contact on this side of the board, so if the pins happen to move when I reflowed them, they would stay in the right place, and these contact points here would act as a jig to keep them in the right place. Okay, so nothing for it, time to reassemble it and test this guy out. Reassembly, you can see the connectors through, and those 4 screws. I didn't show that when I took this apart, but those 4 screws had already come out before I removed that last screw there. So just remember the last screw is going to let that circuit board and the rest of the indicator go, so have it held carefully when you remove the last of those screws, because the Speedo is just going to drop out. And with reassembling them, I've just made sure that they're good, they're snug, not over tightened, and everything seems back in place. So now we just got to put the front back on this assembly and have it ready to put in the vehicle. There we go, cluster reassembled and all ready to go back in the vehicle. You can see on the far side of it I've got those metal straps hooking things to the top, and all the clips around are in, holding the panel on. Okay, quick inspection, all looks good to go. Let's get it back into the car. This should be fun. Okay, here's the hole ready to get the assembly back into. Now these connectors, when I'm putting the assembly in, they're going to be a little bit tricky to get to. So what I'm going to do is just tape them to the sides of the enclosure so that as it goes back in, they're in the right place. So I don't have to try and fiddle my hand around behind to get hold of them. For a couple of minutes I realized I started that step wrong. Kudos to the guy who posted the video how to remove the 1999 Legacy Outback cluster. I'm following his steps properly now. So this is stage 1. And stage 2 here, I'm just ready to rotate it back in, and you can see I've just taped the 1, 2, 3 connectors out the way, and in the back there is the Speedo connector. I'm going to have to wrangle my hand in there. So hopefully pulling those connectors out the way will make putting this back together again easy with my big hands. There's the Speedo connector back in first. Still got the other connectors taped out the way. After a bit of wrestling, all 3 connectors, all 3 big connectors are now back in. And you can see there's the Speedo connector right there in the back. I'm now ready to push this back into position. There we go. Okay, it's back in place. Screws in at the bottom. Only one screw in at the top, because whoever did that botched job must have lost the screw up here. It wasn't there when I did the disassembly, so it's not there now. I'm just going to make sure that it's nice and solid and not vibrating. Okay, it's all back in. Time for a test drive. And this is the offending screw that was the crappy temporary attempt at a fix on the Speedo. It is offensive to my eyes. I will go and find a better purpose for this screw than attempting to fix electronics with a bad connection. Let's see how the test drive works out. Okay, test number 1. We're out on the road. The Speedo is running. So, trouble is with an intermittent issue that you don't know if it's just going to suddenly disappear. So we're taking it for a little test drive. Normally it's been running for a few minutes and then has stopped. So if we get back home again and it's still going, I'll say this is a good sign.
So it's early days. We've done about 150 kilometers since the fix, and no sign of the Speedo not working. So for now, at least, it seems like we've fixed this properly. Thanks very much for watching, and good luck with your own projects on your own Subarus.